All the roll and go, where am I to go? Meet Johnny, where am I to go? For I'm a young and a sailor lad, and where am I to go?
Hello, and welcome to Where Am I to Go? This week is a continuation of last week's podcast of South Pass City. South Pass City was an old gold mining town, and this week we will go and tour the mine shaft and the processing of the ore building. It is very fascinating in the way that everything's set up, and if you were with us last week, you know that John, our tour guide, is a fantastic tour guide and showed us many, many things. If you did not listen to last week's podcast, please go back and listen. The town is very well preserved. The mine shaft has been very well restored, and you get a very nice idea of what goes on in those buildings that you see on the side of the road that are tiered coming down the side of a hill, and how all of that worked and operated. Thanks again for listening, and now let's get on with the show. Okay, we have just gone up to the Cariso mine. It's the actual mine. I have been to a lot of different tours. The mine shafts are usually closed off. There is no access. And John has made it very clear that this is supposed to be open due to coronavirus and some of that on the 20th of June. They're going to have permission to bring anybody in. He's made it very clear that what you want to do, if you want to come see this site, which from just stepping inside the door, it looks like you definitely want to come see this site. The best way to do it is to contact South Pass City here and make an appointment and get the clearance so that you can have the tour up here. You've got a website.
Right. It's www.southpasscity.com. And there'll be a tab or a link there that will take you into tours, and you can make your reservation.
How much is this tour?
If you're under 18 from anywhere on planet Earth, you're free. So kids are free admission. Wyoming adult is going to be a $3 admission. Every other adult on planet Earth is $5.
If you're traveling and you can't afford to come on this tour, you need to figure out how to do it, because and is this tour separate from the park itself?
Your admission to the town site is your admission to the mine site, but you're right, you do have to go to southpasscity.com and get on our reservation sheet. We limit participation just because of the nature of the facility. Town is a walk-in, just show yourself around kind of situation. This is an abandoned mine site, and there are hazards here.
And you were just saying that in order to even get this open to where you could bring things in, you had to get permission from DEQ and from the whole alphabet soup of government agencies.
Right. When the people of Wyoming, through the legislature and through the governor, purchased this property, going on about more than 15 years ago now, they mandated that real science people, real knowledgeable people, not history people like me, come in here first and give it a clean bill of health. So you know when you walk across the parking lot or you enter a building that it's as safe and as hazard-free as it can be for an abandoned mine site. And the public couldn't come here without abandoned mine lands expertise. I work for state parks.
Now, do we actually get to go down in the shaft?
Well, I'll show you what we can see from here. Historically, all of these mines up here are wet. So once you get down about 60 feet, you're in the water table, unless you pump it out. And it's been about 20 years since this mine was last pumped out. Goes down over 400 feet. So
You said that there was 5 layers of mine here where you could go down to each floor level.
Absolutely.
And it goes down 400 feet.
It does. Yep, it does. And again, all of those are underwater. So what I could show you right now, if I were to pump it out, is a beautiful mine. It's in spectacular condition. But again, it's been 20 years since it's been pumped out. And so what we're looking into now is a black abyss that is very safe, It is no carcinogens. There's a tripping and falling hazard, but you couldn't fall 400 feet to the bottom of the mine shaft. We've got a soft polyurethane foam, kind of the expanding Nerf kind of foam, plug about 25 feet down here right now. So if we spill chemical up here, it can't get into that water table and contaminate a bunch of wells. And of course, it also keeps you and me from getting too adventurous today either. So I always tell people this is a public facility. The way it's being managed now is not the way it's going to be managed 10 years, 20 years, 30 years from now. So if you need to see something change this way, that way, another way, speak up. Your voice in Wyoming will carry a lot farther than a lot of places. So come here, experience it, and then voice what it is you see and that needs to be improved. So again, we've got the first two levels of the ladder way are, I could show you right now. We don't take tours down there because it would be a 25-foot tour. And we'd have 20 people standing in the bottom of a mine shaft going like this. But that plug, that safety layer can be removed. It's soft foam. And it can be removed. It hasn't been dynamited or concreted or backfilled or anything like that. So that resource is still there. It's just behind a bit of a barrier right now that keeps the environment safe and keeps us safe.
And that's kind of an amazing thing too, because usually when they backed out of these mines, they pulled their timber and they caved the things in intentionally. You can see where the entrance was when you see them out in the Forest Service land or BLM.
Yep.
And from there, they've been caved in and totally wiped out.
Eradicated, yeah, exactly. And again, mining is the cornerstone of Wyoming history as Wyoming territory, the state of Wyoming. This is the site of the first mining boom in Wyoming. And we'll walk to the oldest mine feature in the Shoshone Mining District, which dates back to Dakota territory. So that mine feature here predates Wyoming history. It's part of Dakota territory history. And some of the graphics and the artwork you'll see around the building here, one of them people asked for, and again, we try to pay attention, is a cross-cut section of the map of the mine workings. And it confirms what we hear from people who were underground 20 years ago, that there are voids 80 feet high underground, totally unsupported by any kind of timber. This rock is real solid. It's real structurally sound, so that even without any kind of support, it stands. It doesn't need any help. The only help this mine needs is a pump that is working and can dewater it. And then you can potentially, again, it's a public facility, ventilation, lighting. I mean, this is there's a lot to be learned at a mine site, whether it's geology, whether it's history, whether it's technology, whether it's health and human safety. This is a laboratory that people can learn.
This is really nice.
So anything that looks old, and you'll hear me say this over and over, is old. And anything that looks new, like this head frame, this 60-foot tower we're now standing underneath, that 60-foot tower was reconstructed. So we've differentiated down in the town site. A reconstruction is from the ground up new, and a restoration is something that has been stabilized and the materials restored or refurbished to a point where they're serviceable again.
But even this new restoration is still done with rough cut lumber and put together the way, at least it appears to be put together in original fashion.
Yeah, and again, Abandoned Mine Lands has done a fantastic job to have a two-track system here. The history people are driving and informing the history and the preservation, the restoration, and the Abandoned Mine Lands people are keeping us safe. They're building it for longevity. They're building it in such a way as to mind the public purse today and also into the future. So it's been a fantastic partnership, and it's one of the very few abandoned mine land sites in Wyoming you can go to and know you're at a mine. Most times their work is so precise that they return that to a natural contour, a natural vegetation. You're standing at an old uranium mine site, you don't even know it. You're standing at an old coal mine site, you don't even know it. But again, the parallel track is the history. You want to know the history of that site. You want to know the stories of the people. You want to know how the technology evolved. You want to know how the buildings changed over time. And you can't do that at a site that doesn't visually interest and excite you the way that this site does.
Oh, yeah. Okay, now, as we walk in, one of the first things we see is a little mine cart on a real narrow gauge track. The cart is probably 4 foot by 2.5 foot.
Yeah, it's a 1-ton car.
And then
Yep.
you've got an elevator with a track on it. So I'm assuming that these cars were put on this track and then dropped all the way down. And then the cars were brought back up and the track goes on out and they dump it.
You got it. This is our interpretive philosophy in a nutshell. When you walk in this space, you shouldn't need me. You shouldn't need a bunch of placards and signs, and you shouldn't need to be flipping through a paper brochure. You shouldn't need to be scanning QR codes. Your eyes and your own experience ought to be able to interpret this, explain this for you.
And how much would one of these carts hold?
This is going to be a 1-ton ore car. It's going to weigh 600 pounds roughly of just iron and steel, empty. And then you'll put 1 ton of ore inside of that. And it is moved manually. One person, a trammer, pushes that. Here at this level, you noted the tracks kind of angle out the doorway.
Right.
I'll roll this a little bit so you can kind of get an idea. It does move. Makes a little bit of noise.
Makes a lot of noise.
When you get out on the dump, that trammer will throw a latch and then manually lift that dump box, and you'll see how the end of it spills open there. And that ore, not ore, it would be waste rock going to the dump. The waste rock gets spilled out on the dump. Everything's latched back together again. And that ore car gets brought back in. The hoistman will send it down. And maybe the next time it goes down, it will pick up ore. And ore here at the Cariso and in many mines is typically a quartz base. The other rock is a metasedimentary rock. It's a real old rock. It's some of the oldest rock you'll find anywhere in Wyoming for sure. And in that rock, you'll have quartz veins, layers of rock that are enriched with gold particles.
And now you were pushing pretty hard on that empty cart. It had to have, a guy stood here all day long and pushed his cart out and emptied it.
And in some instances, many instances, this, because you've been trained how to do this now, you've seen it once, you know how to do this. This is an intro level job for a young man or an older boy at a mine site historically. The technology is simple. You can't break this. And once you've proved you're reliable, you can show up on time, this is something that introduces you to the mine site. We're not going to trust you with dynamite or drills yet. We're not going to trust you with high technology. Once you get this nailed, we'll consider you for another job here at the mine site.
Once I pushed a 2,600-pound cart all day long, I think getting me to come back would be a pretty tough chore.
It might be. But there, as they say,
I don't care how young and dumb and stupid I am.
This is just it, and that's a familiar refrain here too. Is they didn't trust the young guys with anything too mental or intellectual, I guess. But yeah, you connected the dots. We've got the cage here. There's 3 levels that still connect to this shaft. The 3rd, 4th, and 5th connect to this shaft right here. And the 4th level is the longest level underground, and it's about 4 football fields long underground.
Wow.
And again, above the track, in some instances, the ceiling is 80 feet high. The ore was so rich in that pocket, they removed almost all the ore they could and shipped it to the mill. So again, this area right here is the parting of the ways. The waste rock goes to the dump, and the ore goes to the trestle level above us, about 15 feet above our heads, where the trestle runs 400 feet to the mill. So
and so how you've got 400 foot of cable up here that drops this down into the shaft.
Absolutely.
And so you've got one man that's all day long up there dropping this thing down and bringing it back up.
And his workstation is right in here.
Oh, right in here.
Yeah.
Okay. He's not up on top.
Nope.
So is there markings on the cable so that he can see how deep he is?
You got it. Back in the old days, they just didn't push a button and wind up on the 4th floor. They signaled.
Okay. They got a pull string signal.
Oh my goodness! I better investigate that.
He's pulling on the string and there's no signal.
Yeah, this is not a very safe mine today.
Wow, this room is just cool. What in the world is, this is a compressor.
It is an air compressor. Sorry to get distracted.
It's got 2 straight 6 or straight 8, straight 6 cylinders or engines.
It's a straight 6, yeah. It's a single straight 6.
It's a single. Oh, okay, because your compressor's on the back side. That's why it looks like there's 2 engines.
Yep.
And the two pieces look almost identical. So the front one's an engine, the back one's a compressor.
Yep, and the engine is a Buddha motor, and the serial number tells us it was manufactured in 1941. And kind of jumping ahead again into the interpretation that you see, or the visuals that you see here. The town site is interpreted, exhibited in the 1890-1900 period. This is exhibited during the period of its last boom after World War II. So we got a 1941 vintage Buddha motor here, running a compressor end, a SRAM compressor end, and that's enough air to run at least 2 sets of drills underground. We know from documents in the archive here that they even ran this old steam-powered hoist. They plumbed in compressed air instead of steam after World War II to run this for a short time before they actually installed an electric motor on it.
Oh, wow.
So,
and then you've got the exhaust going outside with, there's probably, 20 feet of
just
pipe?
Straight pipe, yeah.
There is no muffler on it, so it had to have been loud.
Very loud. And
but I guess it probably was quiet in the scheme of things when you're running the
generators, pumps, hoist. You've got a lot of action.
All the cable, winch, and everything else. I would imagine that there were people worked in here that didn't hear when they got older, because back in the day, they didn't wear earplugs.
The number one common association both men that I interviewed that worked here had after World War II, both you yelled at them to be heard. They were both hard of hearing. One was an Army vet from World War II. The other was a Navy vet from World War II. They both saw action, and they both lost a lot of hearing there in the Pacific, but they also lost a lot of hearing here. So,
wow.
But yeah, it's an old steam hoist, as I mentioned, and the mechanism has been disconnected. The parts they took off in order to put the electric motor on the opposite side, they stored those parts in the back room here. They're still on site. Wow. So if we wanted to, by the end of the day today, I don't think we'll get that job done, but these cylinders ought to still work. But the electrical systems ought to also still work. We had the motor serviced a few years back. This drum control switch, though, hasn't been serviced, but I'm told that it's one of the new technologies is to use dried ice blasting, like sand blasting to scour and polish, only you use dried ice because the chips, once they scour the surface, vaporize into a gas. So there's, again, where old technology meets new technology, we're trying as best we can to leverage that into an enhanced public experience that's, again, authentic.
Wow. And where was the steam?
The boiler would have been, in the middle of the room there, you can kind of see a steel foundation.
Okay.
And then through the rafters there, you can see where there's a couple blocked out where an old exhaust went up through the ceiling there. Again, historically, the hoistman would receive a signal. I've seen our circuit breaker is tripped for some reason in this room right now, so I'm not going to get too ambitious and start turning stuff on. But you see the signal sign there on the wall. You'd hit a series of tones, and that hoistman would hear that series of tones. He would release these brakes. The cage starts going down into the shaft. He's going to engage the motor forward. There's a few positive stops. And as he hits each one of those, more and more juice goes to the motor. You go faster and faster and faster. Then you slack it up and engage those brakes. You know where you're at because as the drum turns, this chain and sprocket spin this threaded shaft, and this arrow goes back and forth. So you've got level 3, level 4, and level 5. You've also got the shaft collar here at the surface, and you've got the trestle level just right above. So he's got a rough approximation where he's at. On the drum here, you'll see some paint markings. that index with this arrow on the frame. So even 400 feet underground, a good hoistman can be within a couple inches without any other hints or suggestions from the bell.
And then it says the signals up here. You've got 2-1-2 blast would be releasing the cage. You got 3 would be hoist slow. 3, then 1 would be hoist men. Oh, so the men rode up and down on the hoist also.
Yes. Yep. And again, they differentiate between when you're raising and lowering men, miners, or when you're raising and lowering ore, because this hoistman is going to operate a little bit differently when there's people involved.
Yeah. Did he ever just release it just to scare the crap out of them?
There is one story about that the cook up here in the cookhouse, which we don't have exhibited right now, but the cook was pestering the miners. He'd hear him. He'd be pouring coffee. He'd be serving them supper at night. And they'd be saying, well, that blast we set off, we can see that rock is real hot. It's just loaded with gold. And they'd be telling these stories. Oh, yeah, we hoisted 60 tons yesterday. So the cook started pestering him. Can I get down underground? I want to see what that is underground. So the cook and his wife, who assisted him in the cookhouse there, got on the cage. Just like what you said, the story is the hoistman, once he got the thumbs up, he just let the brakes go. And that cage took off breakneck speed, I'm sure it seemed like. You go from fresh air, warm daylight, to this dark, spattering water all around. You've got this rushing of cold air, and this scream, echoed up out of the shaft. And being a skilled hoistman, he slacked this up and slowed it down real nice. They got off the cage down at the 4th level there. They kind of meandered around, and they caught the next cage right back up again. They seen the mine once. That's all they needed to see. Wow. So, and again, having visited with 2 of these fellows that worked here, it adds that element of life and color and levity and authenticity. It's not just old stuff. It's the stories these guys, when you ask somebody 60 years after they worked someplace, what was that like? It's stories like that they remember. They don't remember anything about the geology or the production or anything, the facts and figures. They remember the people, the stories, the drama, or the excitement.
I'm going to do a podcast on what I'm going to call the journey. And it's the journey that you remember. You don't remember all the little things. Yeah. You're going to go see Mount Rushmore. And even though you're going to see it, you may stop at some real interesting places along the way, and it's the journey that makes the memories.
Absolutely.
And that's exactly what you're talking about there.
That's a great idea.
It's going to be one of them coming up here on many different trips I've taken, and the journey being the highlight.
We know from paperwork here that, say like these drills, they took an inventory at this facility in 1953, and this drill is on that inventory.
Wow.
And you'll see
you've got a lot of bits and drills and all that.
Absolutely.
Here.
Yep, absolutely. And the philosophy here is if you can responsibly do it, these artifacts, these objects should be able to tell their own story. They should be able to speak for themselves. Just like that wood stove in town should be able to, the waft of smoke, that stinging little bit of a kitchen match, in your nose, or the smell of a bread or cookies. Well, these drills should tell their story too. And we've got a couple of these historic drills that we know produce the last gold from underground here that still operate. And we can demonstrate those for the public.
And how much does one of these weigh? Probably 250 pounds?
I was going to say, I think the catalog says that those weigh 138, thereabouts. Okay. So it's always a 2-person team underground, the lead miner and then his assistant. And the assistant, helper is a lot of term they call them too. That helper, it's not just the drills that are heavy. It's hauling around hundreds of feet of hose, boxes of tools, boxes of bits. That helper gains experience, but he's got the muscle to do some of this hard labor. The lead driller, the miner, actually knows how to break the rock. He knows how many holes to put in, what angle, how deep, how much powder or dynamite to load in them. So the whole time the young guy is hauling hose and doing chores, he's hopefully learning from the master how to do the work productively and safely.
Now these drills, did they have tripods or bipods that they set these on so that you didn't have to hold the full 130 pounds all day long while you're drilling?
This one here we're looking at is made for blasting ore out of the ceiling, out of the back. So it's its own unit right there. This other one that's in the corner here, that's a sinking drill, and that's for sinking the shaft deeper and deeper. So, you know, its point of contact is the drill bit in you, just like this one here. We've got a drifting column here, and you can see there's threads. It wedges into the drift, into the tunnel underground, and then the drill is mounted on this arm or the T-bar off to the side. And beginning in about the 1929 period here at the Cariso, they did use this kind of setup to drift. This is for running laterally, horizontally underground. These other ones are for working vertically, the sinking drill and the stoping drill.
The thing I find interesting is you go to museums and you see clothes of the men back in this period of time. Go to the Buffalo Bill Museum and you see Buffalo Bill's clothes. The man must have been 5'4", and doesn't look like his arms were any bigger around than a broom handle.
Yeah.
And yet you look at this mining equipment and you're going, men were smaller back then, but they must have been just tougher than tough.
I agree.
Like badgers or something.
I totally agree. And one of the artifacts here speaks exactly to that point that you made. Here's the belt that a miner would wear underground. This loop here is for attaching the battery for his cap lamp, for his electric lamp. And this pocket here is for their pliers or maybe a crimping on a blasting cap tool. And you can see about...
On the last notch on this belt, it's got to be a 12-inch circle.
It's minuscule.
I mean, the distance around would probably be... 18 inches, but it'd be like a 12-inch pipe, maybe.
It's amazing. Yeah, and like you say, wiry, tough, hard as nails, and but taking pride in that mining tradition. They learned that mining from their father, from their uncle, from their older brother, maybe. Maybe they'd lost members of the family in the mines. And so there's other than just being physically tough, it's a heritage, and it's an emotional kind of state of mind to be a hard rock miner.
Man, yeah, you go back and you listen to the song Big Bad John.
Sure.
You know,
down in
he
the
was
mine.
a monster man. 175 or 225 or something, you know, and you're going, yeah, there's a lot of wimpy guys walking around weighing 225, me included.
Absolutely. Yeah, me included too. Yeah.
You know, it's just amazing
Yeah, there's a couple different eras of drills and drilling technology here. I know from interviewing Bob and Terry that the hoistman in between hoisting calls got down. He would measure out fuse, he'd crimp blasting caps onto fuse, he'd make up pipe fittings, he'd service tools, sharpen bits, and then all the time he's listening for that hoisting call, that buzzer, that bell. And then he hears that tone and goes back and executes that hoisting call.
And what was the time distance between dropping one of those cars down and bringing it back up? Because you'd think that with many miners filling up a cart that you'd be running that thing up and down all day long.
Yeah, I know from reviewing the record here, talking to people and reviewing the paper records, the hoisting time, about the fastest they could cycle that hoist was about 3 minutes. But again, I know from interviewing Bob and Terry that on 3 levels, 3, 4, and 5, they had 2 miners each level was all. So very small. You got the master and his helper, his assistant, one of them essentially on each level underground. Again, maybe for safety, to keep them apart. So there's going to be a lot of staggered time between hoisting calls. Yeah.
Okay. And then the other thing that I think is cool is you've got a bunch of dynamite powder boxes over here. That had to have been kind of hairy, sitting on top of a mine and blowing up dynamite down underneath.
It is. And they used about 1 case for a round. So when they got done with their drilling, they had their series of maybe 15 to 20 holes at various depths, maybe 3, 4, 5 feet in depth at various angles. they'd load about 50 pounds of dynamite or powder in those holes and detonate those in a sequence, in a pattern. So it's not just one big shockwave and pattern, it's bang, 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 bang. And that the face or the round opens up gradually so that the pressures inside the rocks lead to chunks of rock that are laying free, as opposed to shattered rock that is still sitting in its original location.
Now, I picked up a book at an auction one time in a pile of books that was a blaster's handbook.
Yeah.
And it's probably, well, it's 6 inches by 4 inches. It's a little pocket handbook.
Yep.
And probably 1.5 inches thick. And it's nothing but formulas as far as how much powder to use, how much fuse to use, the angles and all of the geometry that you were just talking. You had to be a pretty smart mathematical wizard, it looks to me like, and very, very knowledgeable in the materials that you were using and that kind of stuff in order to set your blasts the way that you were saying.
That combination of experience and maybe book learning. So you're going to have some on-the-job training, but manufacturers wanted their products to get a good reputation. They wanted a safe practice, efficient practice to take over so that their products would be used in the future. So I've seen that DuPont manual too. Probably got one in the library down at South Pass City. And that's put out by the manufacturer because they want you to choose their product. They're going to put all this data and information for you to use it safely and efficiently every time. So Linda did notice last time people went underground, or the most recent time, we don't know the last time, about 1994, 1995, the state mine inspector heard a rumor in Lander that, hey, you must be in to inspect that old gold mine up at South Pass. And of course, the mine inspector hadn't heard anything about the old gold mine at South Pass that was going to be opened up. So, well, yeah, I might be here to do just that. What do you know? And so the waitress there at the restaurant starts to spill the beans because she's been talking to the crew. They've been coming to town, buying parts. They've been coming in and talking. And he, of course, detours and makes his trip up here and finds all 6 guys underground here, which should not be the case at a mine site, for safety purposes. You don't put everybody in the hole. And then he started making a list of all of the mining rules and regs that they had broken. And he shut them down. And one of the rules that they had broken was not having a brass board or a tag in, tag out type scenario here. So you know who's underground and who's on the surface. And they busted apart an old cabinet that was here in the building and took out a Sharpie, a magic marker, and penned the guys' names on it, put a bunch of nails in there, got some washers out of a drawer, out of a coffee can, and threw it on there. The next time the mine inspector came back, you got it. You checked it off. So, 10 minutes worth of work, you've done one of the most safety conscious things you could possibly do. So
Cool.
it's common sense. But again, if and this one doesn't look too terribly old because it's not, we've left it in place because it speaks to the safety of the mines, but also how simple it is to be safe if that's your intention.
Very cool.
Yeah, we've got a circuit breaker off. There's one that controls that room over there, and I don't want to get too rambunctious and turn it back on because it might be off for a reason. So, yeah, I was going to say, you notice the dynamite boxes over there? We have an original. We replicated that. We made those on site. Our staff replicated those. And some of them are used for storage. Some of them are just used to add to the exhibit, add to the visual texture and the visual feel of the place. But right next to it is this World War I vintage drill. And that's another one that we hang off that column assembly I showed you. And that one actually does run and does function. So when people see, hear, feel a rock drill, they do gain a whole new understanding, a real firsthand understanding of the site, the smell of the oil in there, the smell of the rock as it's being broken, and the gas or the chemistry of that. It's a very distinct, the compressed air, the hiss of those fittings as they're leaking air or coming up to full pressure. It's a sensory immersion. If you can be there. And again, a guy like me, I'm an imposter compared to those guys who are
Right.
actually doing that work. But when
It
people...
makes history come alive for the historian, though, doesn't it?
It does, and it really makes a connection for the general public who thought gold mining was a pan in a creek. And they hadn't thought about the hoisting. And, well, did guys fall down that shaft? Yeah, they did fall down that shaft. Did guys have accidents with dynamite? They sure did. Did guys have high-pressure airlines come apart on them? They sure did. Did they get scalded with steam? Did they get their fingers cut off in cables? Did they get their toes crushed when they dropped a heavy... Absolutely, all of the above.
And the thing is, they were expected to be to work the next day.
Because
they got paid. There was no workman's comp. There was no sick leave. If your back was sore, you went to work the next day because that's how you fed your family, and that's what you did.
Very true. Very true.
A whole different world. And the reason that we have so many of those laws and regulations is just for those very reasons.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And this is a place where, again, we see a lot of mineral production-related visitors come in. Well, you couldn't get away with that today. Or even that light switch over there, that's not compliant. A light switch has to be a certain configuration to be permitted at a mine site today. And you're exactly right. It's a place where people can see how everything can kill you and know how today really everything is attorney-proof.
What was the expected life or work life expectancy of these miners?
For these guys here at this facility, that's what I'm most familiar with, fairly long, because the boom periods here were always fairly short. You were always open less than about 5 years. You'd go through a high-grade pocket of ore, you'd mine it out, and you'd run into a pocket of low-grade, and you'd have to shut down. Well, then the explosives, the drilling, the hoisting, the technology comes back to where the mining is cost efficient again. Send them back underground for another 3 or 4 or 5 years. So these guys, in addition to being miners, also were timber cutters. They were freighters. They were ranchers. They were jacks of all trades, mechanics, electricians. And of course, then those trades come right back in and make them valuable on the job site. So the last death here occurred during the second boom, right around 1903, when a misfire explosion didn't go bang when it was supposed to go bang. And the first thing 2 miners did was walk back to see what happened. And boom, there it went off and killed them both. And it was... the employer was not found liable because they should have known better. So again, look at today's situation, and workplaces change considerably. You know, a miner wouldn't even think of going anywhere near that today.
Yeah, I remember listening to a guy talk one time about the timber industry, and they would always pay him at the end of the month or the end of the cycle, because a lot of them, when they started out, they maybe would make it 2 months and a tree would fall on them, or I mean, just this old workplaces, you know, mines and all that were just hazards waiting to happen.
They were, and but they had no shortage of people looking for jobs here either.
Oh, exactly.
People knew the danger, but they wanted paycheck. And gold, because it's immediately worth something as soon as you take it out of the ground, has always had that attraction, as opposed to the timber industry, where that timber doesn't really have value until you process it, till you mill it or cut it into cordwood. You have to have a value-added product. Well, gold is nothing required. Once you've got that in your hand, pay me. And so gold mining particularly has always stood by itself. If you want to go up and take a peek out, we can. If you want to make tracks down to the mill, we can go down to the mill too, whatever you...
Let's go.
Okay, one flight of steps.
If you're showing the upstairs, we'll go see it.
Yeah, I was going to say, my tours that I take, I hate to say, I usually at that point say, now we're going to have about 4 more flights of stairs like this. So if you want to save yourself one flight, take a seat on the bench and let the adventurous go up above. So again, historically, instead of looking about 20 feet down, this shaft, again, goes to the 4th level, just over 300 feet underground. And again, that hoistman, he's way back in that next building over. He can't see what's going up here. in terms of stopping his cage at the right place. So he's got to have a real good familiarity with his controls.
And you got tracks up here.
We do these, again, the tracks at the ground level go to the dump. That's worthless rock.
Okay.
That's removed. You have to get that out of the way sometime. What you have up here is going to be quartz. There's a nice piece of quartz right there. And this quartz will have pinhead size and smaller pieces of gold in it. And if it's visible, if you can see it, and I've seen about 20 pieces of quartz with visible gold in it. I've got most of them down in the office. I keep them for tours and for school groups, things like that. Most people haven't seen gold stuck inside of a rock. But all gold starts its life inside of rocks, and it's weathering and erosion that break the rock apart. The gold falls out on the ground, and that's when the prospector can catch it in a pan or in a sluice. So all gold starts its life in the rocks. Since it's still stuck there, you got to tram this ore. You can see this one's a little bit larger car, and it's about half full of rock. This
You still seem to move that fairly easily.
The track is fairly level, and there's not a whole lot of friction here. The 400-foot distance to the mill is fairly close to dead level too. And occasionally someone, well, it must be just slightly downhill. Well, this car doesn't have brakes. So once you get 1.5 tons rolling downhill, you try putting the brakes on it yourself. You can't do it. And of course, if it were slightly uphill, nobody would take that job. So once you're in the mill, you'll throw that lever again. You'll physically lift that up. It'll spill out into the ore bin. And then gravity will bring that rock. And when you open a chute, when you open a gate or door, the rock will spill through the machinery. Raw pieces of material at the top of the building, tailings or processed waste outside the bottom of the building. So it's a real intensive process compared to gold panning.
Oh, wow.
I saw this outside.
That's what, 200, 300 yards to
Yeah, it's just
a track that you say is pretty level. It looks to me like it slopes.
it is slightly downhill. I hate to say that in 1929, when they put the original in place, they were a little bit more precise because I think they knew it meant life or death, possibly. When we reconstructed this, and again, it's might not look like 15-year-old wood or lumber up here, but when we constructed this, I think our contractor misread the bubble on the level once or twice. So
You can almost see that, but it's quite the distance here on a trestle. It's a railway trestle.
it is. Yep.
And it has this narrow gauge rail that runs out about 300 yards, it looks like. So they pushed that cart from here all the way over to there in order to dump it.
Absolutely.
And then brought it all the way back.
Yep. And
That guy walked 1,000 miles a day.
it might have seemed that way, I got to say. And the neat thing, I mentioned our photograph collection down in town. The neat thing is we've got a photograph that says 13 December 1929, first car load of ore. Oh. And there's about 5 guys gathered around an ore car like this, kind of doing their He-Man kind of trophy pose in the middle of this trestle in the middle of December at 8,000 feet above sea level, first carload of ore. They'd worked all summer long to build this view shed, all of these structures, all of this plant that you see today up here, 1929 vintage. And by December, they had just gotten the place ready to produce.
Wow.
And of course, December is
And
when...
of course, you're going outside in December. And
Yes.
you're having to walk on the railroad ties. I mean, that's your step. It's what, 18 inches between them or so.
The big
And
hazard.
so you're having to step on each one of those, making it all the way over.
The big hazard up here, though, is the wind. And when this reconstruction went in, the engineers, modern day engineers, considered the wind loads, the sideways lateral wind loads, as much as they did any gravity downforce on this.
Wow.
And the wind at the top of this hill is amazing. And the railing that you see wasn't here historically. That's a modern safety accommodation, I guess. And we said, well, we're not going to take people out on there. They're not going to risk life and limb on a tour to go out there. Well, you still should have a safety railing on there. So these guys in 1929, they were out in the middle of fresh air and sunshine.
And sunshine.
And
snowstorms.
And
And windstorms.
no safety net.
And no Gore-Tex. I mean, it's just bundled up with woolen clothes pretty much. And I'm sure frostbite, I know frostbite had to be a consideration at that point in time, pushing this thing just that distance, because you're pushing 20, 30 below a lot of days.
Yeah, with wind
With
chill.
wind.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a tough go up here, and that's what's contributed to each one of these eras of boom and bust. Part of that cycle of boom and bust is just the environment, and part of it is distance between here and a vendor, a manufacturer, a rail hub, whatever it might be. So isolation and elevation and weather have always been a challenge up here.
And the view.
Fantastic.
I mean, you look out through this gate, and the bluffs and the view is just absolutely fantastic too.
That's
Did you
it.
see that, Linda?
Oh, yeah.
That's
Okay.
the Oregon Trail country out there. At the base of those buttes is the Sweetwater River, and that's the
Okay.
corridor for the Pony Express for all of these groups going west. And if you were to go out there today, it would look like the day Buffalo Bill was riding for the Pony Express out in this country, a little bit further down the Sweetwater. But I think one day he rode 3 different stations because the Indians had wiped out his...
It was a pretty long ride. I don't remember how
Yeah.
many stations. They had stations every 10 miles.
yeah.
And I think there was more than, I think it was like 100 miles.
Yeah, I was going to say
That
more
he did.
than 70 for sure. But
Yeah.
and that was not too far down the road from here anyway. But
Yeah, those guys were tough.
again, but they had lots of applications to consider. People have always responded to the opportunity to advance and to earn a paycheck.
Yes. And did mining pay super well back then, or was it just another job?
Yeah, again, it's always considered a profession or a heritage by those who were hard rock miners. They would earn about $3 a day if you were an experienced underground miner, and that's a decent, very decent wage at the day. We'll sneak around the building this way. That's where I demonstrate those drills.
Oh, really?
So when I bring out that stoper, I let folks know you're in a mine tunnel now. You want to bring the ore down.
I see.
And so that one drill drills holes into the back. And so you're drilling, and of course, chunks of rock, water that lubricates and cools that drill bit's coming back down on you. So you learn how to run that drill when you're standing off to the side.
And how often do you demonstrate this?
In the summer, last year, I tried to do it every week in July, I think it was.
Again, is this a schedule your appointment and show up and
And when our air compressor's running too. But yeah, if someone calls ahead and they've really got an interest, we'll try to accommodate them. It's a summertime activity though, for sure. So same thing, I rigged up that column with that World War I era drill. That's holes that World War I era drill put in just last summer here. And then I've got a 1960s vintage jack leg that's more portable. It had an aluminum strut on it, a leg on it, and that's from the jack leg drill there. So, and we can show the sinker too off on the other side. So, yeah, it's not something that folks can sit and listen to or watch for a half hour. They need hearing protection.
right?
And they've got to be seated away so that you don't have any flying debris or anything like that. But it's certainly something, like I say, we try to present, and we try to react, though, to the public. What are they interested in? What are they benefiting from? And we adjust from there. So we're headed around the hoist house. We'll stop at the open pit or the discovery shaft, and that's where mining started on this property.
And right now we're walking through a bunch of wind. We'll be back shielded here shortly. Hopefully everybody, oh, the wind's really good here. This is what the miners had to deal with.
No mosquitoes, though.
No, well, that's true.
So-
And no snow at this point in time. It's halfway decent.
We'll look down in this discovery shaft, see if it's melted out there too. But the dumps, this is all waste rock. You won't find much quartz out there. It's all from the construction of that shaft we were at. So about 300 vertical feet of rock is spilled out on this dump. And this dump is smaller than the earlier dump from the first two booms, which is even further down. So there's a second major shaft down there, only that shaft has collapsed and sloughed at the collar, at the surface. And very dangerous area right there. This feature, though, is where mining started. A party of men out of Fort Bridger came up here in June of 1867, and they started panning and washing dirt down at the Sweetwater, and followed up the tributaries of the Sweetwater up to this location where, again, this is an entirely man-made, human-constructed opening here. Above that kind of cavern, you'll see the pink and you'll see the kind of white and blue-gray streak of the quartz running vertically up to the surface there. So that's the vein of quartz that they were after. And this is a real high-grade section in here. And they drilled and blasted and took it all out. Their first method of crushing that rock was by hand. So they took small sledgehammers, crushed it into gravel, and then washed it in pans.
Wow.
And they took 500 ounces of gold back to Fort Bridger with them. And of course, they're paying for all of their supplies, all of their provisions, all of their equipment with gold. And secrets like that, especially at a crossroads of the West, like Fort Bridger was, telegraph communications, lots of freighters, lots of immigrants back and forth. That secret was going to be impossible to keep. So the following year, 1868, is when the boom started up in this district here. But this location is where the gold rush started. And it's still here today. A good example of how abandoned mine lands allows us to visit and utilize a historic mine feature without obliterating it, without getting rid of it entirely. So we can still point at it, learn from it today, and wonder what kind of people these were.
And Fort Bridger's 100 miles away or better, isn't
Yeah,
it?
it's going to be a couple days traveled one way to get up here.
Yeah, you figure, 15, 20 miles a day if you've got a good horse.
Yep, exactly.
So it's going to take you 5 days to get there and another 5 to get back.
And that first party of men was driven off by Indians of one tribe or another. There's various accounts, but they lost a couple members of that party to attack. So they retreated back to Fort Bridger, got more men, got more guns, and this is certainly a gold rush where a weapon was as welcome as a pick or a pan or a shovel.
I think that was the case throughout the West all the way through. If you didn't have a firearm, you were pretty much at anybody's mercy.
In California, I think particularly, you were at the mercy of your fellow miner.
Well, yeah, when you talk about Bodie, I think they were saying there was a murder there a day. That just would have been a rough place to live.
Yeah, in towns where people have expectations, people have disappointments, you've got anything goes in some of those places. And the same could be said for this district too, for a short amount of time. And again, think of that initial boom only being 2 or 3 or 4 seasons of real intense mining activity, and then a complete collapse for over 20 years, and then a smaller intense period of activity, a complete collapse for 20 years, et cetera, for 4 cycles.
Now, did Atlantic City go through the same cyclic deal at the same time, or were they cycling at a different time?
Very similar, very similar kind of series of ups and downs. Their mines tended to be smaller than this one here. So usually there was one operating almost all the time. That one would close. They'd hold the going out of business sale. The equipment would be moved to another mine. That one would start up. It would run for a couple years. And they kind of did this musical chairs of managers, miners, equipment, on and on and on.
And was there one particular family or man or whatever that made it rich, kind of like the Copper King in Butte, or I mean, there was Leadville had, I can't remember who it was. I went to a museum there, and there was like one man that wore the suit and had all the fancy stuff in the mansion on the hill, and everybody else was.
No Senator Tabor here.
There you go. That's who it was, Tabor.
Yeah, exactly. No, I hate to say that those first guys who made it rich out here were essentially anonymous. Those folks who were here mining that first season, second season, they're really the ones that made out like bandits. And it's the subsequent, they just, they blend in. If you're not paying attention, they'll blend into the crowd. So no standouts. I mentioned abandoned mine lands earlier and how their engineering and science people have really helped us. And of course, the legislature, the governor has also helped. This structure, my first tour up here, this trestle that connects to the shaft, the head frame, that great big wooden tower over there over the shaft, those weren't here. And my first tour, I brought a group of people over to this door that's 20-some feet above our heads and said, that's where the ore went into the building. And someone said, so did they have a ladder, or is there a deck here? How did they get the ore up to that? Why wouldn't they just take the ore in the door here? And that's when I knew we had a problem in terms of interpreting or explaining this to the public. And so again, great ideas. I think this will help explain. Almost nobody asks that same question. And again, it's constructed in a way as to hopefully blend in and honor the previous structure and not stick out like a sore thumb, but also to be very safe and long-lived into the future.
It's definitely obvious as to how the whole thing works right now. It's, like you said, very tastefully done.
So don't let this discourage you. It does say keep out, but
I'm not discouraged.
That's historic. So that quartz ore goes in to what's called a grizzly up above us. It's a floor made out of steel bars, and those bars are spaced far enough apart to admit ore that's small enough for this first crusher. But they're tight enough together that ore that'll choke this or jam this first one up can't slide down through the bars. So they would have had a crusher or a sledgehammer up there to break the ore down. Once it's small enough, it spills out chutes here at the bottom of the coarse ore bin onto a conveyor, and that conveyor goes to this first crusher, which is a gyratory crusher.
Oh, wow. Now, gyratory, are you talking is kind of like a mixer?
It's like a mechanized mortar and pestle.
Okay.
So if you can picture a bowl with a rod gyrating in there, this will take about baseball-sized feed, and as it crushes and crunches it down, it spits the broken pieces out.
And this is made by Allis Chalmers, which is a tractor manufacturer and all of that.
Absolutely. I had a guy from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I think they had another plant there. He said, hey, I used to work for these guys. And of course, I wasn't around back when they made this. This was made in 1904. And he said, I'll find you anything you want to know about it. So what that guy did is he went back to Wisconsin, and he sent a bunch of drawings, manuals on how to set this up, what part is called what. I don't think we can still order spare parts, but...
Allis Chalmers has been out of business for a year or two.
Okay, all right. And I did look up that Gates Iron Works facility is a EPA Superfund site in Chicago. So
really?
It's a park now. So
I think their main tractor plant, or one of them, was in LaPorte, Indiana.
Okay.
I went to a museum that they had there that had a bunch of the tractors and stuff, but I've seen pictures of crankshafts and stuff that they had that were like 20 feet long for some of this big industrial.
And that's another segment of people that are really excited by this facility in particular is the industrial history people.
Oh, yeah.
And it might be farm equipment, it might be construction equipment, dozers, things like that, or it might be rock crushers. But again, comes out of the chute at the side, no bigger than about a golf ball. So that first crusher will take that quartz from a baseball size, kick it out, and of course, hopefully visually you can tell what's going on here, even sitting static.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay, this next piece is called a bucket elevator.
And they're little buckets that are about 18 inches long and a foot wide that are on a rubber belt. And it looks like they dump the ore down into the bucket, and the rubber belt takes the bucket on up and dumps it out up higher again.
Yeah, you got it. I mean, and exactly. I mean, we've got a barrier here to keep us from getting into the mechanism or falling down in the pit around it. But largely, we want to keep this place. The lighting is where it was historically. The equipment is how it appeared historically. We want this place to evoke in people's minds the experience of people who used to work here. And this is usually where someone will call me and say, well, you told me back at the hoist, they lift that rock one time out of the mine to the highest point of the production building, the mill, and then they let gravity bring it back down. Now, they're lifting it a second time here. And I said, yep, you know, I don't give the same tour twice. I tell a different story every time. But this time I'll be consistent and let you know this building, this entire building, this is the second location it stood at. Its first location was steep enough to allow chutes and bins to flow downhill. But when it was torn down in the spring of 1929, brought to this location and re-erected, the slope of the hill was too flat. So the equipment then had to lift the rock a second time. And that's what this bucket elevator does. And you can tell there's some old parts, there's some new parts. We built this one, rebuilt this one from shop drawings and pieces of the original equipment, augmented with parts that we couldn't locate and that had to be rebuilt. So this has been operating only for about 2 seasons now. And with it, again, think of the missing link of that trestle outside. This used to be a missing link for us. Now we can show continuously from the place it leaves the ground to the place it gets poured into a gold bar. You can see it all.
This is amazing.
Yeah, it's
fantastic. It just really is. This is just unbelievable. You always see the buildings, you know, when you're driving through towns like let's say Idaho Springs, down in Colorado.
Yes.
You see the 3 or 4 tiered building, and you always wonder, so just how does that work? And now it makes perfect sense in my head.
It will, especially, particularly when you can see this stuff turned on and run. So when this thing actually starts moving and going and telling you its own story, you can get a better idea. So Patrick's gonna...
Oh, we cranking this up? Oh, ain't this cool? This is just...
So that one's a fairly quiet one. And again, with the school groups, that kind of thing, I'll toss a pebble in there. It'll ride to the top. You can see that next row of bins is angled away, sliding downhill. Okay, it slides down there to the next piece of equipment. So again, about right now, you'd hear that rock jangle out of there and fall down the chute and go to the next piece. Some people ask, so when do you get this gyratory moving again? Well, it does turn by hand. Those manuals that a fellow from Wisconsin got us, I got under the hood. We broke all the pieces loose that were all seized up and everything over time. It's just having the...
Oh, that's a big electric motor, too.
Massive.
What is that? Probably 70 horse, 80 horse?
I was going to say it is 70 horse.
70 horse.
Exactly.
I mean, it's just a huge electric motor.
It is. It is. But in 1929... everything in here was powered by steam. So there would have been a dedicated boiler on this level to send steam to that crusher and bucket elevator.
And that thing had to be noisy as all get out when you're trying to crush rocks that you said are golf ball size.
And dust and vibration and terrible working environment right here. You can hear our generator running in the distance. Thank you very much. So it's as quiet in here as it's ever been. Water, that ore car that you saw back at the shaft there, got about a ton of ore. There's going to be about 1,500 gallons of water required to process that 1 ton.
That 1 ton, wow.
So with the gold pan...
And where did you get the water from?
That's from the next drainage away, about a 1/4 mile away. There's a dam, there's a pond back behind it, there's a pump house that pipelines that water over the top of the hill to this building. So
you don't take the water from the shaft and pump it down here from up there.
The volume required is such that you've got to supplement that mine water with surface water. Yep. So again, The gold pan you saw down in the creek there, the family gold panning, you can't recover gold without water, whether it's with a gold pan or in a massive mill building like this.
So what about mercury? I know that they used mercury to extract the gold.
Yep.
Was this system using lots of mercury, or
the tried and true method of recovery going back thousands of years, mercury. And in 1929, when this facility was erected, its principal means of recovery was mercury. And the floor down below us has not historically been a concrete floor. When those science folks from abandoned mine lands, the Department of Environmental Quality came in, they looked at surfaces, they looked at floors, they looked at jars of chemicals, they looked at everything in here and determined the number one constituent of concern or toxin would be mercury in this building. So that concrete floor went in to encapsulate, entomb, and permanently seal off a source of mercury that we can't track out on our feet now. We can't get on our fingers now because it's under 6 inches of concrete. And if the rain comes in the building or the wind blows through the building, Mother Nature can't move that out of the building either. So what contamination they weren't able to remove, they encapsulated or entombed in place.
Okay, now, the Hatters were always known as Mad Hatters because they were dealing with mercury in setting their felt and that kind of stuff. Was that also the case with these guys, or was it not vapored to where they had those problems? Or
they of course knew that was an issue, going back centuries, as you point out, to the hat industry and other industries, to art and some of the pigments that artists use, some of the styles that artists use were based on mercury-based gold compounds. And they knew that. And again, I'll go back to the fact that they knew there was a hazard, and the booms here were always short enough that intensity of exposure was low enough to keep people from getting
what about in other mines, like in Lead,
absolutely.
South Dakota and stuff?
Absolutely.
Where those mines were long-lived.
Yeah, or even a kind of a wildcat kind of situation where someone's got a claim and they retort or vaporize the mercury off. Yeah, mercury contamination, was widespread. I don't want to say necessarily in the mining industry into the 1970s, but again, you see a lot more awareness and a lot more practices change as a result of maybe an environmental movement, and a health consciousness that maybe is more in recent decades. But nobody up here that I can document or see, but certainly the mining industry, people were exposed to it. We'll get into a couple of other gold's best friends besides lead and mercury and arsenic. And
well, they use mercury for a lot of medical things.
Absolutely.
In the day too. I mean, mercury it went with Lewis and Clark.
It did.
That was the cure for some of the diseases that they picked up along the way.
And they still identify some of those campsites by the mercury contamination.
Really?
So we're going to follow that ore that's golf ball sized, spills out on a conveyor. There's a chute right there that leads to a jaw crusher. Oh, sure, I'll rob you. Thank you. Perfect. And I don't know if probably got a rock here someplace I could drop into it. Jaw crusher, this stuff might, that will go. So that jaw crusher, this is a small version of it here.
I was going to say, it's not real big. Wow. This looks like about the size of a coffee grinder that you'd find in an old store.
Sure.
But the amount of torque put on that to crush that rock is just phenomenal.
Yeah. And
it must be geared like crazy.
And it's, like you say, it's got a very narrow pinch point or leverage point where the pressure is just incredible. And of course, what went in...
So you dropped in about, a little bit smaller than golf ball size.
Right, kind of simulate what we're dealing with.
These rocks right here that come out of it are probably less than an inch.
Sure.
Fractured piece.
School tours, that kind of thing. I say, it goes in about the size of a golf ball and comes out like a piece of cereal or a candy, that kind of thing. But there's still gold wrapped up inside of these pieces of quartz. And so what do we have to do? You got to break it out even finer and finer. So because I can't show that jaw up there, I'd like to start showing this one down here a little bit more. Sometimes people will notice those great big barrels of cannonballs there.
Oh, yeah.
They are not cannonballs.
What are they?
They are grinding balls. They're a special alloy of steel that's wear resistant, impact resistant. And you'll see when this machine is running what's going on, or you'll hear it at least anyway. So because there's gold still wrapped up in that quartz, we're going to put these balls in the ball mill to good use. That chute, I'll shine that laser on up there, that goes down into the crusher there. That crusher is connected to this box right here. Call that a feed box. Water is added to that feed box too. And you'll see when the ball mill is turning, this scoop will go down through that crushed feed and water and scoop it up. And as that scoop goes vertical, gravity pulls that water and quartz ore through the hollow trunnion into the shell of the ball mill. And there's about 4,000 pounds of steel balls. And of course, those are not falling on a wooden floor. Those are falling on pieces of quartz ore.
Oh, yeah. And it's breaking it up even better.
And it will pulverize it to dust. So you'll get tiny little pieces. These are pieces of gold that we've milled and then recovered with panning. Panning is traditional. It's safe, a lot safer than some of these other chemicals. But most of the gold recovered isn't recovered as a pure gold. It's recovered as what's called concentrate. And you can see there's kind of some silvery gray crystals in there. That's everything that's heavy in that quartz ore, including gold. So while you can recover that with some effort, most of what you produce right away here is concentrate. You throw away as much junk as you can. So that ore car coming over has about 1/4 of an ounce of gold in it, all in tiny little pieces. So 2,000 pounds of ore has about 1/4 of an ounce of
And
gold.
1/4 of an
That's
ounce
incredible.
right now would only be worth $500.
Yeah, not quite.
Not
yeah,
quite.
yeah, even that. Yep.
So you've got all that effort going into that little gold.
But if you can reduce that quartz to dust and then separate everything that's heavy and save that, an ore car full of just concentrate is going to have about 90 ounces of gold.
Oh, wow.
okay.
90. Yeah, so much. So that's hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, that's incredibly
Right.
valuable. So if you can pulverize it to dust and save the heavies, you're much better off than you were with raw ore.
Wow.
So the crushing takes place in there because you continually are crushing and adding material to be crushed out of the feed box. It continually spills out here. So you'll see a screen here. The big pieces that get kicked out get dropped in front of a jet of water. And that jet of water pushes them downhill. Oh, wrong one.
And then you've got a sluice box here, basically. No?
So the oversize goes downhill through this trough to what's called a classifier. And that classifier, picture that sand and gravel drops to the bottom. That auger that's spinning now will grab everything that's settled in the bottom of the tank, the sands and gravels that still have gold wrapped up in them, and drag them up that spiral back to the feed box for a second grinding.
And this looks like a great big corkscrew is what it looks like, that moves all that stuff up to be re-ground.
And I tell people on tours, if you drop anything over this railing, even if I hit the panic button here, it won't stop before it turns into a big sausage grinder. So yeah, very dangerous piece of equipment. Doesn't look like much, doesn't sound like much right now. But again, its purpose is to drag oversized material back to the feed box so it can go through the mill a second time. When it comes through undersized and small enough to fit through the screen, it comes down this chute across this machine. And you can see there's 2 pools of water there. And when this machine is running, it's also fairly quiet. you'll see there'll start to be a surge or a pulse of water there.
Right.
And that's a jig. That's a mineral jig. And that pulse of water drives off the lightweight quartz particles. It's enough of a pulse to blow the sand away, but the pulse is weak enough and short enough duration that the gold particles drop to the bottoms of those two tanks right there for recovery. Not pure gold, but concentrate.
Okay.
So again, a super upgraded product. And that pulsing action is very ancient technology going back to the Middle East, back to the Bronze Age. They used baskets as jigs, woven baskets.
Now the Mayans and some of those that had great gold empires that were taken by the Spanish and some of that, did they use a lot of these same processes, or were they just lucky and found big chunks of gold?
I think there's some bit of that where there are cultures that are first cultures that understand the value or symbolic value of those metals, but they also had miner's moss or a fleece is a pretty common means for primitive people to recover gold, where you put an animal skin, a wool, in a riverbed, and that natural washing of sands, gravels over the fleece carries the sand and gravel over, but the gold is heavy enough, dense enough, it gets entangled in the fibers and remains there. Wow. So some of these early peoples would then wash that fleece. The gold would fall into their vessel that they were going to contain. They'd put the animal skin back in the creek bank, river bank again, and repeat. So if you want to hear this thing run,
let's hear it.
It does run. So I will hope that it runs.
You can hear those ball bearings moving around. Okay, now what we were just hearing was those ball bearings that are probably 3 inches round, 2 inches round, 2.5. Pretty good size, big to hold in the palm of your hand. You've got what, 1,000 of them in there?
About 4,000 pounds, yeah.
About 4,000 pounds, and they're inside of a drum that's got to be 5-6 foot
5 feet,
diameter,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
and that thing's turning at, I'm guessing,
about 24, 25 RPMs.
25, yeah, okay. And it's breaking down all of that rock before it brings it on out.
Into dust-sized particles that are then carried by water.
Right.
So,
and it's a little bit noisy. Listening to that all day long would make your ears go bad.
it would, and it does. So we should be grateful we've got one more quiet piece of equipment, maybe.
Well, this one here's not bad as far as noise.
They call it a shaker table or a Wilfley table. And if the material escapes that first mineral jig, it'll come to this table next. Stop spitting air. And again, it's added to that corner of the box. You can see the tabletop is angled downhill. There's riffles or cleats of wood on there so that the sand jumps the riffles just like it would in a sluice or a gold pan or anything. And the sand falls off as a tailing here. And the shaking action catches everything that's heavy. And I'll throw a hand of material in here real quick.
Yeah, this table, just to give a description, is probably 15 feet long, 6 feet wide. It's got the ridges in it, and it just shakes. It's got a fairly aggressive shake to it. It's not
Yep.
shaking extremely fast.
A lot of people think it sounds like the paint shaker at the hardware store.
But I don't
kinda
think it's shaking as fast as what the paint shaker
I was going to say, that paint shaker goes a little faster. So what happens is that slurry that still contains gold particles in it is added in the corner. The water brings the lightweight material over the riffles into the tailings trough or the tailings launder. The shaking action will catch the heavy material and shake a line of that black sand or concentrate to this end of the table.
And this end of the table has a smooth triangle, and the smooth triangle, I'm assuming, is the gold comes on out into this point from the wood slats.
And so what we'll see, we haven't run it very long here, but this line right here is your heavy metallic particles, including the gold. And so that material will fall off the end of the table and be collected in a bucket as a concentrate, a gold-rich concentrate. Again, it doesn't look like it's much, but again, an ore car full of that would have about 90 ounces of gold in very small particles. Concentrate from this table, concentrate from that jig over there, we're taken upstairs to be mixed with mercury, just like you anticipated, for amalgamation recovery. That's what they call that process of alloying. There's still gold that escapes this table as a tailing, and it's added to this tank here, which has sodium cyanide solution in it. So as those particles of sand flutter to the bottom of this tank, they're unaffected by the cyanide solution. The small particles of gold, as they flutter their way to the bottom, get dissolved. I tell people it's like a cup of coffee. Coffee grounds, the junk, flutters its way to the bottom of your coffee cup, sits at the bottom. The sugar that you sprinkle in at the top flutters its way and dissolves on the way down. And if you do your part and you sip off easy off the edge of the cup, the bad stuff stays at the bottom, the good stuff comes over the top. So here the gold gets dissolved.
And this is a big drum. It's 10 foot tall.
10 feet tall, 30 feet in diameter.
Wow. Yep. And I always wondered why the cyanide was part of the hazardous waste part of the gold mining.
Yeah, extremely effective at recovering gold, highly toxic, but requires good chemical knowledge and control. Mercury, anybody can use it. You really don't need a PhD. Cyanide process, you need a chemist or a metallurgist to run this process. So picture the particles of sand fluttering to the bottom of this tank. Because you continually add to the tank, the sand would fill this tank up to the top. Yeah. So because we're continually adding, we got to continually discharge out the bottom. So when this rake, hold on right there, when the rake is turning,
there's a great big rake in the bottom of this tank
that rake
is turning fairly slow. Does it go any faster, or is that the speed it goes?
About 1/8 of an RPM. Yep.
I was going to say, that's really slow.
It is. It's got to have a lot of torque on it to pull that saturated sand to the drain in the center. So as it turns, it pulls the sand to that drain, and a thickened sludge of material flows out the bottom of the tank to be disposed of. Over the top trough or launder in this tank, gold-rich cyanide solution spills over to a filtration tank over here. We've got one of these filter elements pulled. It's about, well, what about 8 feet by 4 feet and about 2 inches thick.
Yeah.
Cotton canvas that's saturated with diatomaceous earth.
Okay.
The diatomaceous earth acts as a filtering or clarifying agent to pull solids into the pores of that diatomaceous earth. The cyanide solution flows through the pores of that earth, clarified. And once it's clarified, it's just water, gold, and cyanide in solution that you can see. But all the shaking, the mixing, the swirling, the crushing down below, there's something in it that you can't see. So as it leaves that clarifier, it flows to this large tank right here. I used to make it out to be a super high pressure tank. It's a big cylinder, it's bolted, it's welded.
Right.
It's a super low pressure tank because that shaking and mixing and swirling down below, it's dissolved atmospheric gas into that clear liquid. I tell people it's like Sprite or 7-Up. You look at the bottle, you know there's sugar in there, you know there's citrus flavor in there, you can't see it. But until you lower the pressure by popping the top, you can't see the bubbles either. So this lowers the pressure. The atmospheric gases rush out of that solution, and the clarified solution flows by a inverted cone there. It looks like a big pointed ice cream cone, and that's where kind of the magic of the cyanide process takes place. They add zinc dust. Metallic zinc powder is added to the water, the gold, the cyanide solution as it flows past. Now zinc is added, and as it goes through a pump down below and redirects that solution towards the rafters where it's churning and mixing in the pipes, the gold, water, cyanide, and zinc, that cyanide is seeing that zinc is available, and it wants to bond with the zinc more than it wants to bond with the gold. So it drops the gold that it carried away from the first tank, picks up the zinc that's been added right here, and then flows to a couple recovery tanks. Major one is right there. The older one, this wooden vat, is right here. All of them have fittings, gold, water, cyanide, and zinc flowing down into the fittings. There's about 40 fittings in each tank. Each fitting has a sock or a bag filter attached to it. Gold, water, cyanide, and zinc enter the bag. The water, the cyanide, and the zinc are a liquid solution, passes through the mesh of the bag. The gold's been precipitated as a solid and is caught in the bottom of the bag.
Wow, that's amazing.
And it makes you wonder who the genius was that came up with this process.
The British say it was them. The French say it was them. But the British first industrially, commercially put it to use in New Zealand in the 1890s. And it was a success there. They brought it to America. And the first thing they did in America was use the cyanide process to go through all of the previously milled tailings ponds that they'd recovered only with mercury before. So on this level, again, you anticipated they're going to be using mercury. That's what this barrel is for. They'll bring buckets of that concentrate up here. About 200 pounds of concentrate goes in this barrel here. It's about 4 feet long, 2 feet in diameter. Again, there's a high grinding speed, and that grinding speed is accomplished by adding a bunch of broken grinding balls, worn out drill bits, broken drill steels. As the concentrate tumbles, it's not so much being crushed as it is being scoured and polished. They're scouring and polishing the gold particles that are in there because they're going to then add about half of this flask of mercury, about 20 pounds of mercury in there. And that 20 pounds of mercury is going to slosh through there. There's a 1 pound.
That's all that's going to weigh is 20 pounds?
That's a 1 pound vial right there.
I was going to say, because mercury's just, I've held, yeah. That's only 1 pound?
That's only 1 pound.
No. That feels heavier than that.
Yeah. Very dense, very toxic, and it's gold's best friend.
We're talking a little tiny vial. Well, not little tiny. It's what, 3/4 of an inch round and inch and a half high. And that's a pound.
That's a pound. So that vial there.
I've never felt a pound feel so heavy.
That's a 76-pound flask. So if you remember the old commodities report in the newspapers years ago when you could buy mercury on the COMEX, 76-pound flask, the traditional flask. So they're going to add that. And as that globule of mercury, that 20 pounds or 30 pounds of mercury is sloshing around in there, it's going to be like a vacuum for gold. Only the gold will be absorbed into that globule of mercury. All of the other black sand components, the irons, the manganese, whatever, is going to be rejected. So when they open this up, they're going to collect the globules of mercury all into one big ball. They're going to throw away everything else, and they're going to bring that ball of mercury over to this furnace. And here we've got it in the collection storage right now. It's a sealed pot, essentially, and it's like a still. They're going to use the heat of this furnace at about 900 degrees to vaporize the mercury away from the gold. They're going to collect that mercury vapor in a cooling coil, condense it back down so they can reuse it again, and hopefully not be exposed to the mercury vapors. And they're going to have a product that they called sponge gold out of this. It looks like a utility sponge you might have around the kitchen or bathroom, something like that. Little holes and pores all through that as that tunnel. Mercury is tunneled and bored its way out from the inside of that ball. It leaves kind of a sponge texture. That sponge gold is set aside because we've got socks full of this cyanide precipitate that we're going to have to get into the works here too. So the cyanide product is caught in these mesh bags. It's brought over to this area where they add silica sand. They add potassium nitrate, saltpeter in there. They're going to add borax to it as well. And then they're going to heat that up to over 2,000 degrees in the crucible, in that furnace there. And as that all melts, the gold product hopefully is going to segregate out. It's a precious metal. It's not going to want to alloy with anything. And that flux that you put in, you pour all that material over. I'm tipping over what's called a tilting casting furnace right now. So this whole vessel that probably weighs a ton or thereabouts just tips over with your hand pressure there and falls into this inverted conical mold. And your gold, being the heaviest constituent of that molten mixture, goes to the bottom. And what floats on top is an iron-rich, zinc-rich crust. And this was just apparently thrown out the back door, and nobody, who knows? I mean, out of this 20-pound crust of metals, maybe there's an ounce or two of gold in there. I don't know.
Really?
Wow.
But that crust floats on top, and as everything cools down, they'll take that button out, that conical casting out, and there'll be a cone of gold attached to that that's come from underneath. They'll break off that button of gold. They'll take their sponge gold. They'll put it in another crucible for another refining pour, and that's when this apparatus goes on, this little cradle here. Ingot mold right there. And so as you pour your refined gold, this will catch hopefully every last drop.
Wow.
And we know from mint receipts, the average bar was about 85 ounces. And they could do that every couple weeks, for sure. They could pour an 85-ounce bar. So again, from beginning to end, they could do it all. So we started with raw quartz. They don't give me $150,000 of gold.
Why? What is this, gold-painted lead?
It is. It is
It's just like me painting the shot.
I was going to say, you tried to pull the wool over the school kids' eye. I'm still trying the same thing today. But I'll guarantee you when I hand that to they're like, oh my goodness, is this real gold? And I say, no, they don't give me that kind of stuff to play with. But it gives people an idea of going from raw rock to a product that's for sale. Anyone will buy that.
Oh, yeah.
And if you can go in your home business, whatever it might be, from a raw audio cutting and down to a refined product that you can sell or get somebody to purchase or sponsor or, this, that, or whatever. You can do it all in-house and you don't have to go to a technician or go to, more talent or something like that.
Yeah, more talent is what I need.
Well, I was going to say, I thought that's what I was going to be today. But,
You are the talent.
But
I'm just trying to extract it from you.
It's a fantastic thing. And there's people that are just wired for the old building. It's really cool architecture. You never see anything like this, or the old technology, or I just like seeing gold. I always wanted to know how they do that. And usually hopefully there's something for everybody on this tour. Whether
I can't imagine anybody not enjoying this tour from the old town and the old buildings, like you said, the architecture, just the way that things are designed. You guys have done such a nice job with your restorations, the canvas being stretched over for the wallpaper, the way that you've set up the rooms in the hotel, the kitchen, everything that you've done is top-notch, fantastic. It's a wonderful place to visit.
Thank you.
It's easy to get to, other than it's out of the way because Farson isn't really a destination. Lander maybe more so, but you've got to drive 30 miles out of Lander up a canyon to get up here. But it's a pretty drive. It's a beautiful drive. Driving past the Red Canyon there is just absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah.
And anybody that's headed to Yellowstone, anybody that's headed anywhere and interested in coming through here, the stop is so well worth it.
Thank you.
And you have been an absolutely fantastic guide. Again, if you're wanting to take the tour of the gold mine, make sure and call first, and you'll have a guide that'll bring you through here. You'll be able to see everything we've talked about, see the process. And like I said, I've driven past these gold mines and different mine places several different times and see the the buildings that are coming down a slope on several tiers. This puts it all totally into perspective. You see how it all works. And next time I drive by one, I'm going to be going, hey, I know how that works. I know how that gold comes in there. I know how it goes down through here, goes through that ball mill, goes through the crusher, comes out and is refined. And I'm sure the process is the same for silver. It's the same for
Very
ore.
similar.
And just as another sideline, going over South Pass, you have the old iron mill up here. That's all closed down now too, right?
It is. Yep. Used to be the county's largest employer, and again goes back to that commonality of mining and mineral production always being the backbone of Wyoming economy.
And did they get gold out of that mine also?
They did not. It's an old rock formation, but it just has location in common with this rock formation here. So that one was blessed with iron. This rock formation here was blessed with gold.
And they're only 10 miles apart.
Yeah, not even. Yeah.
But the thing that's cool is that you still drive by there. They got the two great big lakes out there now that used to all be quarry.
Yep.
Back when I drove by there 30 years ago, it was all quarry. They've got rocks out there that are absolutely huge. It's a neat mine to just drive past because that's what you do.
Yes.
But anybody that is anywhere in the area, you need to come see this. You need to set up the appointment so you can come see this mine and the way that it operated. And the ghost town, which is in great shape, is so nice to see. And you can bring your RV here. You can bring your dogs. You can bring your kids. They can pan for gold. They've got material there. We were just panning with some kids a little while ago,
trails.
watching them get gold out of their pan. They were pretty excited about it. And like you said, trails and stuff.
You bet.
Don't miss it. John, thank you so much for your time.
Good to see you.
And I hope people listen and show up.
Me too. Enjoyed having you.
Yeah, thank you.
All the roll and go, where am I to go? Meet Johnny, where am I to go? For I'm a young and a sailor lad, and where am I to go?